Okay, so the vision of Advocates International is really to bear witness to Jesus Christ and represent him in the world and work kingdom. As far as our mission, what we do to push that in our network of global Christian lawyers and students is that we encourage them to follow the Lord principle, which stands for L, to meet locally, O, to organize nationally, R, to network regionally, and E, go through some discipleship. Because just because someone's a Christian and has gone to law school, practice law, or maybe acts as a judge, doesn't mean they have the best understanding of God's call to law and justice. And I know it personally in this. God got a hold of my heart while I was in law school. I went to a Christian law school for one reason, but God really spoke to me about the nations and a network of international lawyers. So this became my theme verse for a long time. It's Isaiah 51:5, which I can just read. It says, "Listen to me, my people," the Lord speaking. "Hear me, my nation. Instruction will go out from me. My justice will become a light to the nations. My righteousness draws near speedily. My salvation is on the way, and my arm will bring justice to the nations. The islands will look to me and wait hope for my arm." So what's so compelling to me about that verse is that God is saying he's sending something across the earth to the islands, remote places. And I work in a place with 17,000 islands called Indonesia. And what he's dispersing there is two things he says here: justice and salvation. So we all know people have been serving the Lord, importance in the gospel, leading people to Christ. But what we seldom think about is God's character of justice and his intention for people to live in justice and in peace. So part of our mission and our heartbeat, try to get the lawyers involved in, say, about 6 areas. So for instance, one of those things would be fighting corruption and promoting the rule of law. I mean, World Bank studies have repeatedly shown that the level of poverty of a nation, and we know with poverty comes a lot of suffering, with that level of poverty, it's directly proportional and commensurate with the corruption in that country. And we know what it says in Scripture, that righteousness exalts a nation, sin is a reproach to any people. It's a better task dealing with issues of corrupt righteousness. It's lack of law, it's lawlessness. Godly lawyers and judges, those are the people equipped to help deal with that. So that's part of our calling. And it directly helps the economic development of nations. I mean, I think for years, the missions paradigm from the West has been, send people to preach the gospel, and that we all need to do that. Our lawyers network needs to be trained in it. Send agronomists, send people who can work with farm, people who can work with construction, send school teachers. Well, how about sending administrators of justice, lawyers, to help bring rule of law into society? And the flourishing that can give to save everybody, no, but it certainly is loving your neighbor. And that's what Jesus commanded us to do. So it's a tangible way. One area of service is anti-corruption and rule of law. It has tremendous impact on how nations develop. Advocates' mission there is nation building from a godly perspective, bringing every nation into the kingdom of God, as we'll see in heaven. Another area people get involved in, or could get involved in, is religious liberty, how important that is so the gospel can go forward. We partner with a lot of other Christian organizations to help make that happen. That's a key area. So that's the second one. And a third one would be providing justice and rights for the poor and make sure they're safeguarded, and hand in hand with the first one about corruption. So a story that I know is true from some of our colleagues in Africa was of a woman who lived in a village, and I believe she was a Christian, and she started a sewing business. So she got a sewing, and it was a poor area in Africa, and but she made business and she started saving up money, and things were looking better for her family. And with her earnings and what she was able to save, she bought a second sewing machine. So then some hoodlums from the neighborhood came and saw the sewing machines and stole them. There was no police to jump in. There was no court system. This woman was defenseless and her business was crushed. So defending the rights of the poor and needy, they have rights under their law. Those rights are in the law, but the law is not executed. So if we can invest in that by volunteering, putting resources, by bringing justice to economically deprived communities in the developing world, we can do a lot of good in the name of Christ. Just giving a cup of cold water, that's awesome. Giving some legal justice is also awesome. That case turned out for the better, as I recall. So in other areas, there's protection of human life and understanding that. So we have a lot of our lawyers, a lot of our advocates work in the area of protecting the understanding and promoting why abortion is not a very good option. So things like that, assisted suicide, they'll get involved in life issues. A fourth area would maybe be peacemaking, reconciliation, even at a national level, as a number of our advocates in Africa have been called by God to bring healing among different ethnic groups. That's really needed. And one of the other one that's, I guess, in the West been a problem is marriage and family, as that's been threatened by redefinition of marriage in terms never before heard of in the history of the world. So we have as our mission, our heartbeat, these areas of service where we want our attorneys and students to get involved in the society and the culture. Role, as far as what I'd be doing, is something new here is trying to train the Christian lawyers with materials on worldview about law and justice so that they can serve in these areas a lot better. So when they're working in society in these areas, they're really understanding how they help God through their labors, bringing glory to Christ in every sphere of life. So that is a challenge for us to develop resources and to speak to their needs and honestly fill a little bit of a void they've had in their legal education, in the sense that they really weren't exposed to about God's design for law and God's design for justice, and why it's a blessing on the earth, how it can make a difference, how you can love your neighbor through law and justice. And that's really the calling, is that law shouldn't be on one side of the spectrum as kind of a judgmental, mean thing, and love on another. No, through law and justice, we can love our neighbor. And I just highlight the areas where we can do that. Again, my challenge is developing resources to help our students and attorneys get that biblical foundation in law and justice that they're, so they can be very effective in this work. How can people participate and get involved? Well, we'd like people to find Christian lawyers who are not plugged in, so they can start meeting locally, organizing nationally, and networking regionally, and read the materials and training things we're going to give them to help them be good servants for Christ in the legal profession. So if people listening to this know lawyers that are Christians that are maybe feeling like they're lone rangers flying solo, how to connect with that so they can get involved in a local fellowship and be encouraged and trained and equipped so they can glorify Christ in their work, make a difference tangibly. Another area, of course, is Institute of Christian Legal Studies International, which I'm up as executive director, is new. And so once we get these resources developed, summaries, training materials for lawyers to help them, a lot of it needs to be translated. So finding translators and financing that would also be an important thing for people to get involved in if they can. And then also prayer, as we looked at that verse in Isaiah 51, verses 4 and 5, about God sending out his arm reaching. Well, we've got to be a part of that arm. And that means being really plugged into Christ, abiding in him. And what we're doing as far as bringing justice to the nations, fulfilling that vision in Isaiah 51, is tough work. It's opposed. And so intercessory prayer is always important. So those are some of the ways people, I think, can participate in the vision and work we do at Advocates. So basically, the aim of the Advocates International Institute of Christian Legal Studies, in a nutshell, is to develop, distribute, and disseminate quality Christian worldview materials about law and justice to our students, attorneys, other constituents in the legal profession, so they can be more effective in serving Christ and his kingdom, or impactful in their communities to bring justice, peace, and love. That's basically what it stands for. One other thing I would share is that how God is moving so rapidly, it seems, in different parts of the world that I never even expected I'd be involved in. When I was practicing part-time law in Miami, Florida, it's because I was interested in international things. But I never thought I would end up in Indonesia, also working in Korea before that, and several other Southeast Asia, dealing with some of these issues as a lawyer. And about 2013, when we moved here, we helped start the Indonesian Christian Legal Society. It was myself, a former student from Korea who happens to be Indonesian, and the managing partner of a law firm here. And the three of us prayed, and we began the Indonesian Christian Legal Society. Today, 3.5 years later, we have 10 chapters in Indonesia, not just Jakarta, but several other cities, some of them in predominantly Muslim areas. All of them having a peaceful relationship with some of the Muslim leadership in charge of those regions. So God is really moving and helping us find common ground for improving things in this society here. This has been a really phenomenal thing to see God do this and be part of his arm extended in Isaiah 51 to bring righteousness and salvation to the islands. So 3 of the functions we hope to achieve through the Advocates International Institute of Christian Legal Studies to help our attorneys especially, again, get them involved in one of these 6 areas of service, whether it's rule of law, religious liberty, rights for the poor, peacemaking, protection of family, life, and marriage. Get them involved in a service project. That's first. But really first, even before that, number one in all that is to help train them and equip them in biblical worldview, especially about law and justice, what God's design is for that. And finally, in many of the nations where we have advocates, they just need better international practices on how to do things. Evidence gathering, taking witness statements, how to present arguments. So practical legal training. So to summarize, the Institute for Christian Legal Study at an international level is going to work on Christian worldview for its students and attorneys so they can have the right mindset in their calling and career to glorify Christ. Number 2, getting involved in one of those 6 service projects. Number 3, developing professional competence so they'd be just very good, competent lawyers.